The CEO's twin baby won't stop crying until the poor janitor did the unimaginable. It's almost midnight in Wallace Pharmaceuticals. Carl Wallace, a 35-year-old CEO, stands in his glass office, his face pale, his suit wrinkled. His phone is on speaker, echoing the non-stop cries of his 7-month-old daughter Melissa. He presses his palm to his forehead, shaking from exhaustion. 63 days. That's how long she's been crying. No doctor could explain it. No nanny could handle it. His phone buzzes again. His wife's message flashes on screen. "I'm done, Carl. I can't live like this." She's gone. His company is failing, his home feels like chaos, and his baby's pain has no end. Carl rushes home, heart pounding, through the quiet streets of Greenwich. Inside the mansion, the nursery light spills into the hall. Melissa screams in her crib. Her twin brother, Matthew, cries softly beside her. Carl drops to his knees, helpless, tears forming. That's when a soft voice breaks through the noise. Standing at the end of the hallway is Myra Tucker, a janitor in a simple gray uniform, holding a mop bucket. In the next 20 minutes, this woman, who earns $15 an hour, will do something no specialist could. But what happens after will change everything. What would you do if a stranger knew more about your child than you did? Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe in order not to miss our powerful stories. Carl stood frozen in the nursery doorway, torn between exhaustion and disbelief. Melissa's cries filled the air, sharp, desperate, and endless. Her little face was red and wet, her body arched as though even being touched caused pain. He wanted to hold her, to soothe her, but every attempt made things worse. Myra Tucker stepped closer, hesitant but calm. Her gray custodial uniform looked out of place against the polished white walls and designer baby furniture. She wiped her hands on her apron and spoke gently. "Sir, may I?" Carl hesitated for a moment, his pride clashing with desperation. Then he nodded. "Please. I've tried everything." Myra moved slowly, her voice soft and measured as she picked up the baby. "She's not just crying to cry," she said. "There's a rhythm to it, short gasps, pauses, then screaming. I've heard this before. It's pain, not fussing." Carl frowned, rubbing his tired eyes. "But the doctors said she's fine." "They missed something," Myra replied, her eyes focused on the child. "When she eats, she probably pulls her legs up, arches her back, right?" "Yes," Carl said quickly, a spark of hope flashing through his fatigue. "Exactly that. How do you know?" "My youngest son had the same problem. It's called a dairy protein intolerance. The formula is hurting her stomach, causing reflux. The medicine alone won't help if the food keeps upsetting her." Carl's throat tightened. "She's been suffering for weeks." Myra nodded, gently positioning the baby upright. "Silent reflux. You can't always see it, but you can hear it in the cry." She tilted Melissa at an angle, supporting her tiny head and chest with practiced care. Her hands moved in slow circles over the baby's stomach, firm but tender. "Counterclockwise," she explained softly. "It helps the gas pass through. See? Her breathing is changing." Carl leaned closer, watching as the high-pitched screams faded into soft whimpers. For the first time in 2 months, Melissa's face relaxed. Within minutes, her tiny hand rested against Myra's chest, her eyelids fluttering. The house fell silent. Carl covered his mouth, his shoulders trembling. She's quiet." Myra gave a small smile. "She was trying to tell you something. You just didn't know how to hear her yet." Tears welled in Carl's eyes. The weight of endless nights, failed appointments, and self-blame came crashing down. "I thought I was failing her. I thought something was wrong with me." Myra shook her head. "You were doing what any parent would do. You just needed the right information." He sat down heavily on the edge of the crib, his hands shaking. "Myra, please, help me. I can't lose her. I don't care about job titles or appearances. I'll pay you whatever you need. Just don't leave." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Wallace, I'm just a janitor. I'm not trained for—" "You just did what 5 nannies and 4 pediatricians couldn't do," Carl interrupted. "That's all the training I need to see." Myra hesitated. "Sir, I still have my cleaning shifts. Other staff depend on me. And my daughter works nights. I watch my 3 grandchildren during the day. They're still little." Carl nodded without thinking. "Bring them here. Every day. We have rooms. A big yard. I'll make it work." "You'd let me bring them here?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. You saved my child. The least I can do is make things easier for you." Myra exhaled slowly, as though weighing a lifetime of caution. "All right, sir. I'll help you. But on one condition: you promise to listen, even when my advice sounds too simple." Carl managed a tired laugh through his tears. "Deal." For the next hour, they worked together in silence. Myra wrote down a list of things to change: different formula, upright feeding positions, smaller portions, no rushed burping. She taught Carl how to hold Melissa against his chest to ease pressure from her tiny stomach. By the time she left, the house felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it felt alive again. Carl stayed in the nursery, watching both twins sleep. Melissa's chest rose and fell peacefully for the first time in 63 days. He ran a hand through his messy hair, still struggling to believe it. He whispered, "You're okay now, baby girl. You're really okay." The clock read 2:37 a.m. when he finally sat down in the rocking chair, cradling Melissa close. He could smell the faint scent of Myra's hand lotion, lavender and soap, lingering in the air. He thought about the irony: a man worth millions, with every resource at his fingertips, had been rescued by someone society often overlooked. As he drifted off with Melissa sleeping peacefully in his arms, a quiet realization sank in. This wasn't just about a baby who stopped crying. It was about the night a stranger gave him back his faith, his family, and something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Morning sunlight streamed through the nursery curtains. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. Melissa lay sleeping in her crib, her small fingers curled around the edge of a soft blanket. Carl stood beside her, afraid to breathe too loudly, as if any sound might break the miracle that had unfolded overnight. Myra returned just after sunrise, her uniform freshly pressed, holding a small paper bag. "I brought the new formula," she said with a smile. "It's hypoallergenic. The proteins are already broken down. We'll start slow." Carl watched as she mixed the bottle carefully, her movements steady and sure. When Melissa stirred, Myra lifted her into her arms and began to feed her slowly, keeping her upright. The baby drank quietly, no crying, no painful arching. After finishing, Melissa simply sighed and rested her head on Myra's shoulder. Carl covered his mouth in disbelief. "It's working," he whispered. "Told you," Myra said softly. "Sometimes it's not medicine. It's just knowing the right thing to give." By the third feeding, Melissa's crying had reduced by almost 80%. Even Matthew seemed calmer, no longer startled by his sister's endless wails. Carl felt the tension in his chest finally begin to lift. At the office later that day, his executive team noticed the difference immediately. Carl's energy had returned. He looked rested, focused. He cleared his backlog of reports, held meetings, and even smiled, a rare sight in recent weeks. But behind closed doors, whispers began to spread. "Did you hear?" one assistant murmured in the break room. "He hired the janitor as his nanny." "No way," another replied. "You're joking." "I saw her at the gate this morning, pushing a stroller. Same uniform." By the end of the day, the gossip had reached nearly every floor of Wallace Pharmaceuticals. Some found it touching, others ridiculous. But Carl didn't care. For the first time in months, his daughter was resting, and that mattered more than what anyone thought. When he returned home that evening, Myra had both twins bathed and fed. The room smelled faintly of baby lotion and warm milk. She smiled when Carl walked in. She slept for 2 naps today. That's progress. Carl exhaled, almost laughing in relief. Progress? That's a miracle. But the peace didn't last long. The following morning, Victoria returned. Her heels clicked sharply across the marble floor as she entered the nursery. She stopped mid-step when she saw Myra sitting on the rocking chair, humming while holding Melissa. "What is going on here?" Victoria demanded. Myra stood quickly. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm just—" "I know who you are," Victoria snapped. "You're the janitor. Why are you touching my child?" Carl appeared behind her, his voice calm but firm. "Victoria, please don't start. She's helping." "Helping?" Victoria turned to him, her voice rising. "You've hired a cleaning lady to care for our children. Do you know how humiliating that sounds? What will people think?" "I don't care what they think," Carl replied. She figured out what no doctor could. Melissa's finally sleeping. She's better. Victoria crossed her arms. "You're risking our family's reputation because of a crying baby? You should have called a specialist, not a janitor." Myra stood quietly, her eyes lowered but her posture unbroken. Carl stepped forward. "Victoria, you walked out when things got hard. She walked in when no one else would. If anyone saved this family, it's her." For a moment, Victoria said nothing. Then she grabbed her purse. "Do whatever you want, Carl. I'm not living in a house where a janitor plays nanny." She stormed out, slamming the door. The silence that followed was heavy, but Myra finally spoke. "Don't worry about me, sir. I've dealt with worse words in my life." Carl shook his head. "You shouldn't have to. Thank you for staying." "I stay because she needs peace," Myra said simply, glancing at Melissa. "Babies feel what we carry inside. If we're angry, they can't rest. We teach them calm by living it." 2 days later, Myra arrived with her 3 grandchildren, bright-eyed kids under 8. They greeted Carl shyly before rushing to peek into the nursery. Within minutes, laughter filled the room. The twins were fascinated by the new voices. Matthew, ever calm and observant, watched quietly as one of the children showed him a colorful rattle. Melissa, in contrast, reached out boldly, her eyes wide with curiosity. For the first time, Carl noticed how different they really were. Matthew the gentle one, Melissa, sharp-eyed and full of energy. Myra smiled as she watched them. "You see that? Twins, but different souls. That's how God makes balance." Throughout the week, Carl began observing how she worked with all the children. She never raised her voice. She didn't scold. When one of her grandchildren spilled juice on the floor, she handed the child a cloth and said, "We clean our mistakes, not cry over them." Carl couldn't help but notice how natural her wisdom felt, simple truths delivered without pretense. She didn't use parenting manuals or expert charts. She relied on instinct, patience, and love. One afternoon, as she settled Melissa into her crib, she said, "You can buy every gadget in the world, Mr. Wallace, but children don't need fancy. They need steady. They need to feel safe." Carl looked at her thoughtfully. "You really believe that's enough?" She nodded. "It's what raised my 4. Not money. Not comfort. Just showing up every day and not giving up." That night, as the twins slept peacefully, Carl stood in the doorway, watching them. For the first time in months, the house felt like a home again. The whispers at the office, the judgment from Victoria, all of it faded in the face of something real and simple. Trust. He glanced at Myra sitting quietly in the rocking chair, knitting something small and white. She looked up and smiled. Carl smiled back, realizing that in just 1 week this woman, once a stranger mopping the hallway, had become the heart that steadied his broken world. By the 2nd week, the change in Carl was impossible to ignore. He arrived at the office early, well-rested, focused, and present. His assistants were relieved to see him back to his old self, or at least close to it. But not everyone was pleased. The company board had called for an emergency meeting. Carl entered the glass-walled conference room, confident but cautious. Around the long table sat 10 executives, each wearing the same expression, a mix of concern and judgment. Richard Leland, the chief operating officer and Carl's longtime rival, spoke first. "Carl, there's been talk about your domestic decisions." Carl clasped his hands. "If this is about my family, it's not relevant to company business." Richard leaned back in his chair. "When your personal life becomes public discussion among shareholders, it's very relevant. Word is, you've hired a janitor as your child's caregiver. That doesn't reflect well on leadership judgment." A low murmur spread across the table. Carl's jaw tightened. "Myra Tucker isn't just a janitor. She's the reason my daughter is alive and healthy. I stand by my choice." Another board member, Mrs. Kramer, frowned. "No one's questioning your love for your family, Carl, but perception matters. Investors need to see stability, not sentiment." Richard smiled thinly. "You're a brilliant businessman, Carl, but this makes you look unstable. Distracted. Some might say unfit to lead during a merger." Carl's voice dropped, steady but sharp. "You're talking about a woman who solved a medical problem none of the so-called professionals could fix. If that makes me unfit, so be it." The room went quiet. Carl gathered his notes, stood up, and left. The door shut behind him with a soft click that carried more finality than anger. Later that evening, when he arrived home, Victoria was waiting in the living room. She looked flawless as always, perfect hair, elegant dress, but her eyes were cold. "We need to talk," she said. Carl sighed, hanging his jacket. "If this is about Myra, I don't want to argue." "It is about her," Victoria replied, crossing her arms. "People are talking, Carl. My friends are asking why their husband's CEO lets a janitor play nanny. Do you know how humiliating that is for me?" "Your pride doesn't come before our daughter's health," he said quietly. Victoria's voice rose. "You're ruining our image. Do you think the board respects you? They're probably laughing at you right now." Carl turned toward her, his tone calm but unyielding. "I don't care if they laugh. Melissa is finally sleeping. She's healthy. That's all that matters." Victoria's face hardened. "Then make a choice. It's her or me. Fire her, or this marriage is over." For a moment, the silence between them was thick. Carl's chest tightened, but his mind was clear. He'd already made this choice the night Myra calmed his daughter's cries. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he said simply. "I won't fire her." Victoria stared at him in disbelief, then picked up her purse. "You'll regret this." She walked out without looking back. The front door shut softly, less dramatic than before, but far more final. Myra appeared from the hallway, holding Melissa, who had just finished a bottle. She had heard everything but pretended she hadn't. "The little one's ready for bed," she said gently. Carl nodded, his voice low. "Thank you, Myra. For everything." Over the next few weeks, Melissa thrived. She slept through the night, laughed easily, and reached milestones early, rolling over, sitting up, babbling new sounds. Even Matthew seemed happier. The house, once filled with tension and noise, now carried laughter and the soft hum of Myra's songs. In the evenings, after work, Carl began to join Myra in the nursery. He would watch as she read softly to the twins or played simple games that taught them to focus. Sometimes, They'd talk quietly over coffee at the kitchen table after the babies slept. "You've got a gift," Carl said one night. "You understand people in a way I can't." Myra smiled faintly. "It's not a gift, sir. It's years of learning the hard way." "What do you mean?" She hesitated before speaking. "When my husband died, I had 4 kids under 10. No money, no college degree, nothing but a mop and determination. I cleaned offices during the day, hospitals at night. Slept maybe 3 hours most days. But my children, they all finished college. One's a nurse, one's a teacher, one works in accounting, and my youngest, he's in the army." Carl's eyes softened. "You did all that on your own?" She nodded. "You do what you must. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready." He looked down at his hands. "I've had everything, education, money, influence, and I still didn't know how to help my own child. You did, with nothing but heart and experience." Myra shook her head. "You're too hard on yourself. Love is learned by showing up, not by knowing everything." Carl smiled faintly. "You sound like my mother. She used to say the same thing." Myra chuckled softly. Then she was a wise woman. Their conversations continued night after night, filled with lessons no business school could teach, about patience, humility, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. Carl began applying those lessons beyond his home. At work, he listened more and spoke less. He learned to see the janitors, receptionists, and delivery drivers not as staff, but as people with stories as deep as his own. The gossip still lingered, but it no longer mattered. He'd found something far more important than approval. One evening, as Carl tucked the twins into bed, Melissa reached out, grasping his finger tightly. He smiled, realizing she no longer cried when she saw him. She trusted him completely now. In that small, quiet moment, Carl understood the truth Myra had been showing him all along. Success meant nothing if he failed the people who needed him most. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt not just like a CEO, but a father. 3 months later, the change in the Wallace household was remarkable. Melissa laughed freely now, her once constant cries replaced with joyful giggles that filled every corner of the house. Matthew followed her around like a gentle shadow, always smiling when she did. The twins had turned from fragile infants into curious explorers. Carl had changed too. He was back at the helm of Wallace Pharmaceuticals, sharper and more grounded than ever. The merger that once seemed doomed was back on track. Investors who had doubted him were now praising his renewed energy and focus. But amid all the progress, something quietly troubled him. It started one afternoon when he noticed Myra leaving early. Her uniform looked older, and she moved slower than usual. Later that evening, while sorting documents in his office, he came across a letter accidentally left on the kitchen counter. It was from her landlord, a notice about overdue rent. Carl frowned. Myra had been working fewer cleaning shifts since taking care of the twins. She'd never asked for more money, even though she'd practically become part of the family. The next morning, he called the finance office quietly. "Can you pull the payroll records for Myra Tucker?" A few minutes later, he had the answer. She had reduced her hours by nearly half to stay available for his children. Her earnings had dropped so much that she was barely covering her bills. Carl felt a knot in his chest. Later that day, while Myra was feeding Melissa, he asked softly, "Myra, can we talk for a moment?" She looked up. "Of course, sir. Everything okay?" He nodded. "Yes. More than okay, thanks to you. But I noticed you've been cutting back your shifts. You didn't need to do that." Myra hesitated. "It's fine. My daughter needed help with her little ones since her husband left. I've been sending her some money. I can manage." Carl blinked, surprised. "You've been helping her even while struggling yourself?" Myra smiled faintly. "That's what family does. We look out for each other. I've always believed that if you have something to give, you share it, no matter how small. He looked at her, realizing the depth of her quiet strength. You shouldn't have to struggle for helping me, Myra. You've given this family everything. I want to make it official. I'm offering you a full-time position here, permanent caregiver, household coordinator, whatever title you want, with full benefits and a salary equal to one of my senior executives. Myra froze, eyes wide. Mr. Wallace, that's too much. I can't accept that kind of money. I'm not educated like them. I just help with the babies. It's not charity, Carl said firmly. It's payment for expertise. You solved what others couldn't. You taught me how to be a better father. You've done more for this family than any consultant or executive ever has. This is what you deserve. Her voice trembled. I don't want people saying you're just being kind to a poor woman. Carl smiled softly. They already say plenty. Let them talk. I know the truth. Despite her hesitation, Myra finally agreed, with one condition. I'll accept, but only if I can still help clean once in a while. It keeps me grounded. Carl chuckled. Deal. But the decision came with consequences. Within a week, rumors flooded the office again. Some whispered that Carl had lost his mind. Others claimed he was having an affair. A few even questioned if he was fit to lead. The whispers grew louder after the company released a statement naming Myra Tucker as a senior family consultant, with a generous compensation package. Richard Leland wasted no time taking advantage of it. During a board meeting, he smirked and said, "Carl, you're blurring the line between professionalism and personal sentiment. People are confused about what's happening in your home and your company." Carl looked at him steadily. "What's happening is leadership, Richard. Not every decision has to fit your definition of logic." Still, he could sense the tension spreading through the ranks. It was time to confront it head-on. The following Monday, Carl called for a company-wide meeting. The large conference hall filled quickly. Executives, assistants, maintenance workers, janitors, and lab technicians all gathered, curious about what he had to say. Carl stepped to the podium, his expression calm but resolute. "I've heard the talk," he began. "Some of you think I've lost perspective. Some think I'm letting personal matters affect my work. You're right, my personal life did affect me. But not in the way you think." He paused, letting the room settle. "A few months ago, my daughter was very sick. Doctors, specialists, expensive experts, they all failed to help her. A woman who cleans these halls every night was the one who saved her. Her name is Myra Tucker. She didn't have a degree or a title, but she had wisdom, compassion, and experience that no textbook could teach." The room was silent. I was reminded that leadership isn't about money or status. It's about listening, learning, and respecting every person's value. So starting today, Wallace Pharmaceuticals will launch a new initiative: childcare support, flexible hours for working parents, and family health consultations for all employees, regardless of position or pay grade. This was inspired by Myra's heart and her example. A quiet murmur ran through the audience, this time not of gossip, but admiration. Even Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Myra stood near the back of the room, her hands clasped, tears glistening in her eyes. She had never imagined her small acts of care would reach this far. Carl met her gaze across the room and smiled. "We talk about innovation here," he said. "But sometimes the greatest innovation isn't in the lab, it's in how we treat each other." When the meeting ended, employees surrounded Myra, shaking her hand, thanking her. For once, she didn't feel invisible. That evening, as Carl drove home, he replayed the day in his mind. The noise, the doubts, the whispers, they no longer mattered. He'd learned something deeper than business success. True leadership begins when you start seeing people not by what they do, but by who they are. And that realization, like Melissa's quiet laughter, was the sound of a life finally set right. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable night when a janitor's steady hands calmed a baby no one else could help. Life in the Wallace home no longer felt like survival, it felt like peace. Melissa, now 13 months old, was thriving. She toddled across the nursery floor with growing confidence, babbling new words every week. Her eyes were sharp and curious, often fixed on objects for long stretches as if trying to understand how the world worked. Her pediatrician called her exceptionally alert for her age. Matthew, the calm twin, had grown into a gentle and observant boy who adored his sister. Together they filled the mansion with sounds of laughter, music, and the daily chaos of toddlerhood. Carl had found his rhythm too. His mornings began not with corporate stress but with breakfast shared between giggling babies and Myra's cheerful voice humming gospel tunes in the kitchen. He had fully embraced being a single father, changing diapers, preparing bottles, and reading bedtime stories without hesitation. Myra had become more than a caregiver. She was his guide through parenthood. Her steady advice kept him grounded, reminding him that children needed presence more than perfection. Her family had also become part of his. With Carl's encouragement, Myra's daughter and her 3 children had moved into the mansion's guest house. "It's not charity," Carl had told her. "It's family." The children filled the yard with energy, playing alongside the twins every afternoon. The twins began calling Myra Nana, a name that melted Carl's heart every time he heard it. Her grandchildren, in turn, treated Melissa and Matthew like younger siblings. The house that once echoed with loneliness now overflowed with laughter and life. At Wallace Pharmaceuticals, the changes Carl made rippled through the company. The merger he once feared losing was now a complete success. Profits were climbing, and more importantly, employee morale had never been higher. He'd implemented bold new policies inspired by Myra's wisdom: on-site childcare, extended parental leave, and mental health support for working parents. "If families thrive, the company thrives," Carl often said in interviews. At first, other CEOs dismissed his approach as sentimental. But when productivity and retention rates soared, those same critics started calling it revolutionary. Business magazines ran features with titles like "The CEO Who Put Family First" and won. For the first time in his career, Carl's success wasn't built on strategy alone, it was built on empathy. One afternoon, as he reviewed quarterly reports, his assistant entered quietly. "Sir, there's a visitor asking to see you. She says it's urgent." Carl looked up from his desk. "Who is it?" "It's Mrs. Wallace." He froze. It had been months since Victoria left. He wasn't angry anymore, just distant, detached from what their marriage used to mean. "Send her in," he said finally. Victoria entered, her appearance immaculate as always, but her confidence seemed thinner now. "Carl," she began softly, "you look different." "I feel different," he replied, his tone calm but guarded. "I've been following the news," she continued. "The merger, your new programs. It's impressive. I didn't realize how much I'd lost until now." Her eyes flicked briefly toward a framed photo of the twins on his desk. "I miss them. I miss you." Carl exhaled slowly. "You walked away, Victoria. You said you couldn't live in this life." "I made a mistake," she said quickly. "I was overwhelmed. I thought I couldn't handle it. But seeing what you've built, seeing them so happy, I want to come back. We can make this work again." For a long moment, Carl said nothing. He thought of Melissa's laughter, Myra's steady presence, and the fragile peace he had worked so hard to protect. "Victoria," he said gently, "you're right. You did make a mistake. But the person who paid for it was our daughter. She needed calm and love. She has that now. I won't risk her peace to fix something that already broke." Victoria's face hardened. "So that's it? You choose her over me?" "I choose what's best for them," he said simply. "Always." Her lips trembled, but she nodded, turning away. "You've changed," she whispered before walking out. Carl stood at the window long after she was gone, watching Myra and the children play in the garden below. The sight grounded him. He wasn't lonely, he was surrounded by family, the kind built through care, not convenience. That evening, as the sun set over the yard, Myra joined him on the patio. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked. He nodded. "It is now." "You look like a man who finally found peace," she said with a small smile. "I think I did," Carl replied. "And I owe most of it to you." She shook her head. "You owe it to your heart for learning to listen." The sound of laughter drifted from the garden, the twins chasing Myra's grandchildren across the grass, their joy echoing against the mansion walls. Carl smiled, realizing how far they'd come. 6 months ago, that house was filled with crying and despair. Now it was a home, a real one. As twilight settled, he turned to Myra and said, "This, right here, is what I didn't know I was missing." She nodded. "Family has a way of finding us when we stop trying to build it by ourselves." Carl took a deep breath, feeling the truth in her words. The life he had now wasn't the one he planned, but it was the one that finally made him whole. 3 months after Victoria's visit, Carl took Melissa and Matthew to a new pediatrician for their routine checkup. It was the first time they'd seen a new specialist since everything changed. The previous doctors had dismissed Carl's concerns too many times, but this one came highly recommended for his openness and attention to detail. Dr. Hannah Lee, a calm and thorough woman in her 40s, spent nearly an hour with the twins. She listened carefully as Carl described Melissa's early struggles, the sleepless nights, the arching, the endless crying, and how Myra's approach had changed everything. When the examination ended, Dr. Lee looked up from her notes with quiet surprise. "Mr. Wallace," she said, "your description matches a classic case of dairy protein intolerance with silent reflux. The signs were there from the beginning." Carl nodded slowly. "That's exactly what Myra said months ago." Dr. Lee smiled. "She was absolutely right. I can't believe it wasn't caught earlier. The reason it was missed is simple. Most specialists rely on test results more than parents' observations. But you described the symptoms perfectly. If they'd listened to you, they would have seen it." Carl let out a long breath, half relief and half frustration. So she was right all along. She was, the doctor confirmed. Sometimes, experience is the best teacher. Whoever this woman is, she has remarkable instincts. That night, Carl shared the news with Myra. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I'm just glad the baby's okay. That's all that matters." But Carl couldn't let it end there. A few weeks later, he was invited to speak at a medical conference in New York about Wallace Pharmaceuticals' family wellness initiatives. During his presentation, he decided to include a story the audience didn't expect. He began by showing a slide of Melissa as a newborn, tiny, red-faced, crying. "This," he said, "was my daughter at 7 months. No one could help her. Not the experts, not the specialists, not the endless prescriptions. Until a woman who mopped my office floors at night held her once and said, 'She's not difficult, she's hurting.'" The room went silent. Carl continued, "She wasn't a doctor. She didn't have degrees. But she'd raised 4 children on her own, through poverty, sickness, and loss. Her experience saved my daughter's life. She diagnosed what everyone else overlooked. I owe her everything." The presentation ended with an image of Myra holding a smiling Melissa, the baby's hand resting on her cheek. "Her name is Myra Tucker," Carl said. "And she taught me something every leader and every doctor should remember. Knowledge without empathy misses the truth." The audience stood and applauded. Several physicians approached him afterward, asking to connect with Myra, curious about how she recognized the signs so accurately. 2 days later, a journalist who attended the conference published an article titled, "CEO Credits Janitor with Saving Daughter's Life." Within hours, it spread across social media. By morning, it was on every major news outlet. Headlines read, From mop bucket to medical marvel, the woman who saved a CEO's baby. Corporate leader says real wisdom comes from everyday people. The story struck a national chord. Talk shows discussed it. Parenting blogs praised it. Even medical forums debated it. People saw it as a symbol of humility, a reminder that expertise can come from lived experience, not just credentials. Reporters showed up outside Wallace Pharmaceuticals hoping to interview Myra. At first, she refused. "I'm not special," she told Carl. "I just helped a child." But as messages poured in from working mothers, grandmothers, and single parents across the country, she began to understand that her voice represented something bigger than herself. One afternoon, Carl found her sitting in the garden, scrolling through hundreds of messages on her phone. "They're writing to me, Mr. Wallace," she said quietly. "Women saying no one ever listened to them before. They're thanking me for speaking up." Carl smiled. "You've given them hope, Myra. That's powerful." Reluctantly, she agreed to appear on a televised parenting segment, her first interview ever. When the host asked how she figured out what was wrong with Melissa, she simply said, "You don't need letters after your name to know when a baby is in pain. You just need to listen." Her honesty touched millions. Soon after, invitations began to pour in, from parenting conferences, family health panels, and even medical schools. Each time, Myra insisted Carl join her on stage. "You tell your part," she'd say. "The part about listening." At one event, a young medical student asked, "Mrs. Tucker, what's your secret?" Myra smiled gently. "There's no secret. Children speak before they have words. Parents just need to learn their language." By the end of that year, the story of Carl and Myra had become more than a viral headline. It was a movement. Healthcare professionals began encouraging patient-driven communication. Companies adopted Carl's work-life policies. Families across the country shared their own stories of unexpected heroes. One night, as Carl and Myra sat together after another long day of interviews, he turned to her and said, "You've changed the world without even trying." She laughed softly. "I didn't change the world, sir. I just did what mothers and grandmothers do every day, care enough to pay attention." Carl nodded, watching Melissa play nearby. That's exactly what the world needed to hear. Exactly 1 year had passed since that night, the night a janitor turned a father's despair into hope. The Wallace mansion, once filled with silence and anxiety, now glowed with life and celebration. Carl had transformed the backyard into a warm evening gathering, string lights hanging from the trees, tables covered with flowers, and the smell of food drifting through the air. It wasn't a corporate event or a grand charity gala. It was a family dinner, a celebration of love, healing, and second chances. Myra's entire extended family filled the garden, her daughter, grandchildren, cousins, and even neighbors who had supported her during hard years. For the first time in her life, she wasn't working an event, she was being honored at one. The twins, now 18 months old, were the center of attention. Matthew laughed freely, running across the grass with Myra's youngest grandson, while Melissa clung to a chair leg, steadying herself. Her bright green eyes were fixed on Myra, who stood a few steps away, smiling and clapping softly. "Come on, baby girl," Myra encouraged. "You can do it." The guests went quiet. Carl paused mid-conversation as Melissa let go of the chair, her small legs wobbling. One step. Then another. And another, straight toward Myra. When she finally reached her, she fell into her arms, giggling. Tears filled Myra's eyes as she hugged the child tightly. "That's it, sweetheart. You walked." Carl's throat tightened. He clapped, his voice catching as he said, "She took her first steps to you." Myra laughed through tears. "Guess she knows where home feels safe." Laughter and applause filled the air. Even Matthew, always quiet and observant, began clapping too before joining the other children in dancing to the soft music. The calm twin had changed. He was livelier now, more expressive. Playing daily with Myra's grandchildren had brought out his confidence. As the night continued, Carl's relatives began arriving, people who had once kept their distance after his mother's passing. His mother's sister, Aunt Ruth, hugged him tightly. "We saw the story everywhere," she said. "We're proud of you, Carl. Your mother would have loved what you've done." Carl smiled, glancing toward Myra across the yard. She would have loved Myra too. They're a lot alike. Ruth nodded. Kind hearts always find each other. Near the kitchen patio, Myra's daughter Vanessa stood chatting with a group of Carl's executives. She wore a crisp white nursing uniform, her ID badge gleaming. She had just completed her nursing degree, a dream once impossible, now real because Carl had sponsored her tuition. "You look good in that uniform," Myra said as she joined her. Vanessa smiled, holding her mother's hand. "I start next week at the Wallace Pharmaceuticals Health Clinic. Can you believe it?" Myra's eyes glistened. "I can. You worked for it. I'm proud of you." Carl approached them. "The clinic's lucky to have you," he said warmly. "You've earned every bit of it." Later in the evening, Carl stepped forward with a microphone in hand. The chatter quieted as everyone turned toward him. "1 year ago tonight," he began, "my daughter was crying, my life was falling apart, and I had no idea what to do. I was a man with everything, except peace. Then someone walked into my home with nothing but compassion and changed everything." He gestured toward Myra. "She didn't just save my daughter. She saved me. She reminded me that real strength doesn't come from status, it comes from love and resilience." A hush fell over the crowd. Myra stood near the twins, shaking her head, embarrassed by the attention. "So tonight," Carl continued, "I'm proud to announce something close to my heart. We're launching the Myra Tucker Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping working parents, especially single mothers and caregivers, access education, childcare, and mental health support." Gasps of surprise rippled through the audience, followed by applause. Myra covered her mouth, stunned. Carl smiled gently. "This isn't just named after Myra, it's co-founded by her. She's an equal decision-maker, not a figurehead. Every policy we create, every family we help, will carry her touch." Myra's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Wallace, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Carl said softly. "You've already built the foundation. It's time we give it a name." As applause spread through the garden, Myra wiped her eyes. "I'll say yes," she whispered. "But only if you stop calling me Mrs. Tucker at work. It's Myra." Carl laughed. "Deal." Later, after the guests had eaten and the twins were asleep, Myra sat beside Carl on the patio. The night was calm, the garden lit by the soft glow of string lights. She looked at him thoughtfully. "You gave my family what I always prayed for, security and dignity. For years, I worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I used to tell my kids that one day, all that hard work would mean something. I just never imagined it would lead here." Carl's expression softened. "You gave me something too, Myra. You reminded me that family isn't built by blood or money. It's built by showing up." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then I guess we built a family together." They sat in silence for a while, watching the children sleeping nearby. Carl finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I used to measure success by numbers, profits, growth, mergers. Now, I measure it by this. By peace. By seeing my children safe, surrounded by people who love them." Myra nodded. "That's the only kind that lasts." In the distance, the faint hum of laughter still lingered from the remaining guests. The garden that once symbolized wealth now represented something much deeper, a shared life rebuilt on kindness, faith, and gratitude. It had taken 1 year, 1 act of compassion, and 1 extraordinary woman to turn tragedy into legacy. And as the lights shimmered against the night sky, Carl knew this was only the beginning. 2 years after that night, the Wallace mansion no longer felt like a place of sorrow. It was alive, full of laughter, warmth, and the daily rhythm of a family that had been rebuilt from the ground up. Melissa was 2.5 now, bursting with energy and curiosity. Her speech was advanced for her age, her memory sharp, and her spirit unshakable. Teachers often called her a little scientist, always asking why and how about everything she saw. Matthew, her calm twin, had grown into a thoughtful boy who balanced her energy perfectly. Together, they filled every room with light. Carl watched them each morning with quiet gratitude. He still woke early, but not to chase deadlines or crisis calls. Instead, he made breakfast with Myra, packed snacks for the children, and drove them to the small early learning center they both adored. Those were the moments he treasured most, ordinary but sacred. At work, the transformation he'd begun 2 years earlier had taken firm root. Wallace Pharmaceuticals had become one of the most respected companies in the country, not for its profit margins, but for its culture. Employees received generous family benefits, on-site childcare, and mental health support. Productivity soared, but more importantly, loyalty did. Retention rates were the highest in the industry, and major publications started calling the firm the employer of choice for working parents. When asked how he had done it, Carl always gave the same answer: "I listened to people who didn't have power, but had experience." Myra's wisdom had spread beyond the walls of his home and company. With Carl's encouragement, she had written her first book, Grandmother's Wisdom: What Cleaning Floors Taught Me About Raising Children. What started as handwritten reflections during nap times turned into a heartfelt collection of lessons about patience, love, and perseverance. Carl helped her find a publisher, but it was Myra's honesty that made the book a sensation. It sold over 1 million copies in its first year, praised for its raw truth and simple, comforting voice. Reviewers called it a book that feels like being hugged by someone who's seen it all. Soon, television networks and parenting conferences invited her to speak. She reluctantly agreed, traveling part-time for events but never missing the twins' milestones. No matter how famous she became, Myra's first question after every trip was always, "How are my babies?" Her schedule remained grounded around the family. Every morning, she was there to greet the children with warm oatmeal and laughter. Every evening, she tucked them in with stories that carried lessons hidden in love. Meanwhile, life moved forward for everyone else too. Victoria remarried, a man the tabloids described as a more suitable match. She smiled for the cameras, her diamond ring flashing brightly. Yet, whenever the media showed photos of Carl, Myra, and the twins attending charity events or family gatherings, her expression softened. In a rare interview, she said, "They look happy. I'm glad he found peace." But those who knew her could see the regret behind her polished words. Carl read the article once, then closed it without comment. He had no bitterness left. His life was exactly where it needed to be. Though he dated occasionally, romance was never his focus. He was content in his role as a father and as part of an unconventional, beautiful family that had rewritten his definition of home. Time seemed to move faster after that. Before he knew it, Melissa's 3rd birthday arrived. The garden buzzed with life as more than 50 guests gathered: Myra's extended family, Carl's reconnected relatives, company colleagues, and friends from the foundation they had built together. Laughter filled the air as children chased balloons and adults mingled with plates of food and stories. In the center of it all sat Myra with Melissa on her lap, helping her balance as she leaned toward a cake covered in pink and white frosting. Matthew stood beside them, grinning proudly. "Go on, sweetheart," Myra whispered. "Make your wish." Melissa closed her eyes tightly, then blew out the candles in one big puff. Everyone cheered. Carl felt a lump in his throat watching them. The little girl who had once cried endlessly now laughing with her whole heart in the arms of the woman who had saved her. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Carl lifted his glass to speak. The crowd grew quiet. 3 years ago, he began, I thought success was about control, about how much I could achieve or own. But life proved me wrong. It took one incredible woman to show me that family isn't about titles, or blood, or wealth. It's about who shows up when you need them. Myra, you gave me that lesson, and I'll never forget it. The guests applauded, many wiping away tears. Myra stood, smiling shyly. Mr. Wallace, Carl, you taught me something too. For most of my life, I thought kindness and respect were luxuries people like me didn't get. But you proved that goodness still exists in places I never expected. You gave my family security, but more than that, you gave us dignity. Carl reached for her hand, his voice soft. We gave each other family. The crowd erupted in applause again, the sound mingling with children's laughter and the hum of music. As the night wore on, Carl stepped back for a moment to take it all in, the children running barefoot through the grass, Myra surrounded by people who adored her, his employees laughing beside relatives who had once been strangers. The world he had rebuilt was not made of boardrooms and mergers, it was made of people. He glanced toward the stars, feeling a wave of gratitude. That awful night 2 years ago, the crying, the exhaustion, the sense of failure, had felt like the end of everything. But standing here now, he knew it had been the beginning. The worst night of his life had led to the best decision he ever made. He turned back toward the garden, smiling as Melissa called out, "Daddy, come play." Carl walked toward her, surrounded by the family he never expected but now couldn't live without. Sometimes the help we need comes from the most unexpected places, and real wisdom has nothing to do with titles or paychecks. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our powerful stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear that struggling doesn't mean failing, it means you're human. Thank you for being part of our community. Your likes, comments, and shares help us keep bringing stories that matter.